Volvo. The car your dad called the safest box on the road. This is the brand that invented the three-point seatbelt back in 1959 and then gave the patent away for free because saving lives mattered more than money. It does not get more wholesome than that, so here's the twist. Volvo is owned by a Chinese company called Geely. They bought it from a cash-strapped Ford in 2010 for $1.8 billion. And everyone assumed the same thing. The Chinese owner would cheapen the brand and strip it for parts. Geely did the exact opposite. And the way they did it is the part worth understanding. Their pitch was literally, Volvo will be Volvo. Keep the Swedish engineers, the headquarters, the safety obsession. But just let us own it. To outsiders, nothing changed. But that hands-off promise was the genius part because of what was happening underneath. Quietly, Geely and Volvo built a shared car skeleton together. One engineering platform, designed by Volvo's people, that any brand could build on top of. Volvo got what it could never afford alone: deep pockets and the entire Chinese market. And Geely got what money usually can't buy: decades of world-class Swedish safety engineering, which it then bolted under its own cars. That's the real move. That Swedish platform now sits under Geely's own brands, and under Polestar, the slick electric cars you've seen everywhere, which is also Geely. So China didn't buy a trophy and let it rot. They bought a teacher. Volvo got its best decade ever. Sales doubled past 700,000 cars. And in return, it quietly taught a Chinese car maker how to build like Sweden. Motorola. This is the company that invented the cell phone, the very first handheld mobile call in history. 1973. A Motorola engineer standing on a New York sidewalk. Then came the Razr, the flip phone every cool kid had to have. Motorola wasn't just American, it started the entire industry. Fast forward to today, Motorola is Chinese, owned by Lenovo, who picked it up from Google in 2014 for about $2.9 billion. But forget the price tag. The interesting question is why? Why would a Chinese company want a fading American phone brand at all? Here's the thing nobody tells you. Lenovo could build a great phone. What it could not build was trust. Try selling a phone called Lenovo to an American carrier in 2014. Nobody knew the name. The shelves were closed, and the stigma of cheap Chinese electronics slammed the door. But Motorola? That name was already inside. Already trusted. Already had the carrier deals, the brand love, the shelf space. In exactly the Western markets, Lenovo couldn't crack on its own. Lenovo wasn't buying a phone company. It was buying a passport. And here's the kicker. They'd run this exact play once before. In 2005, Lenovo bought IBM's entire PC business, including the ThinkPad, that black laptop in every boardroom on Earth. Why? Because no CEO in 2005 was going to put a Lenovo on the boardroom table. But an IBM ThinkPad? Instant credibility. And it worked. Before IBM, Lenovo had barely 2% of the PC market. Today, they're number one, the biggest PC maker on the planet. The lesson Lenovo learned twice: you don't fight a trusted Western name, you just buy it and walk in through the door it already opened. GE Appliances. You genuinely cannot get more American than General Electric. It was Thomas Edison's company, and the GE is stamped on the fridge, the oven, and the washer in millions of American kitchens. It's a logo that basically means made in the USA. But the shocker here is that it's owned by a Chinese company called Haier, which bought it back in 2016 for $5.6 billion. Here's the detail that catches everyone off guard. Haier got the right to keep stamping GE on those appliances all the way until the year 2056. So that all-American badge in your kitchen is really a license name on a Chinese-owned product for the next 30 years. But now flip your assumption completely. You'd expect the Chinese owner to ship the jobs to China and slap the GE name on cheaper imports. That's the story everyone fears. But they did the reverse. Haier took a Chinese production line of washers and dryers that were being built in China and moved it to Kentucky. They poured over $3.5 billion into the old GE factory complex in Louisville, added hundreds of American jobs, and brought manufacturing back across the ocean. But why would they do that? Because Made in USA sells. The flag on the box is worth more than the savings from cheap labor, so the Chinese owner is the one actually fighting to keep it American. The most American appliance brand there is now Chinese-owned, GE-branded, and partly built by a Chinese company right there in Kentucky. Nobody's assumptions survived this one. Pirelli. If you've ever watched Formula One, you've stared at this name for hours. Pirelli makes every single tire on every single car in F1, and it's been proudly Italian since 1872. But now, the controlling owner is a Chinese state-owned company called Sinochem, which took control back in 2015 for around 7 billion euros. Normally, that's where the story would end, with another famous brand quietly changing hands. But this is where Pirelli gets genuinely strange, because a modern tire isn't just rubber anymore. Pirelli builds something called the cyber tire, tires with sensors inside them, feeding back live data on grip, temperature, road conditions, and exactly where the car is and how it's being driven. And the Italian government suddenly realized something deeply uncomfortable. A Chinese state company would have access to all of that, across millions of cars, all over the world. So Italy did something it almost never does. It invoked a special emergency power, which they literally call golden power, to claw control back from its own company's largest shareholder. The government ruled that Sinochem could appoint only 3 board members, and none of them could be the chairman or the CEO. On top of that, Pirelli was ordered to refuse any instruction coming from the Chinese state, and to wall off its sensitive tire sensor technology and data completely. Think about how wild that is. A tire company became a national security fight, all because of the data it collects. The Chinese own the shares, but Italy passed a law to make sure they don't own the secrets. The Formula One tire you watch every Sunday is now the center of a quiet war over who gets the data inside your wheels. Riot Games. The makers of League of Legends, one of the biggest games on the planet, with 100 million people playing it every month at its peak. There's a Netflix show, Arcane, that won an Emmy, and the World Championship fills arenas like the Super Bowl. Riot Games feels like the ultimate cool California game studio, and it is 100% owned by Tencent, a Chinese company. Not a minority stake, not a slice. They own the entire thing. Tencent started buying in back in 2011, and by 2015, they owned all of it. And if you're a gamer, brace yourself, because this goes so much deeper than one studio. Tencent also owns most of Supercell, the makers of Clash of Clans and Clash Royale. They also own a big chunk of Epic Games. Yes, the Fortnite people. Unreal Engine, the software that powers a huge slice of modern video games, comes from Epic Games, so Tencent's in there too. And they hold pieces of the studios behind Valorant, PUBG, Elden Ring, and Assassin's Creed. Add it all up, and Tencent is the single biggest gaming company in the world. Bigger than Sony, bigger than Nintendo, bigger than Microsoft's entire gaming arm. Over 1 billion players are touching a game that Tencent owns a piece of. Here's what makes it so clever. Tencent mostly leaves these studios completely alone, keeping the same logos, the same teams, and the same games you already love. They don't slap a Chinese flag on the loading screen. They just quietly own it and collect. So, if you are someone who is into video games, you've almost certainly played a Tencent game this month. You just called it by a different name. Smithfield Foods. You might not say the name out loud, but it's probably in your fridge right now. Smithfield is the biggest pork producer in America. Behind the bacon, the ham, and the sausage is proper heartland American food, going all the way back to 1936. In 2013, it was bought by a Chinese company called WH Group for about $4.7 billion. At the time, it was the largest Chinese takeover of an American company in history. And everyone assumed the reasoning was simple. China wants more bacon. China has well over 1 billion people who love pork, so they just bought the pork company. End of story. Except that's not really what they bought. Here's the thing. China's own farmland has a serious pollution problem with contaminated soil and dirty water, which makes raising pigs safely at that scale genuinely difficult there. What America actually had that China desperately wanted wasn't the meat at all. It was the clean land, the clean water, and decades of safe industrial-scale farming know-how. So when WH Group bought Smithfield, they didn't just get the factories. They got roughly 140,000 acres of American farmland. In a single deal, a Chinese company became one of the largest foreign owners of land in the entire United States. It was never really about the sausage on your plate. It was about owning the ground it's grown on, and the clean water that feeds it, exactly the things China couldn't easily get at home. The bacon was just the cover story, but the land was the real prize. Anker. If you own a phone charger that actually lasts, there's a good chance it says Anker on it. They've been the best-selling charger brand on Amazon for years. The reviews, the trust, that little blue logo, it feels like a clean, modern, maybe even American tech brand. But it's Chinese. Founded in Shenzhen, and here's why it matters. Every other brand on this list got Chinese-owned the expensive way. Billions of dollars to buy a trusted Western name. Anker did the opposite. It didn't buy anyone. It built the trust from scratch. The founder, Stephen Yang, was a Google engineer. He quit, moved to Shenzhen, and started the company with under $1 million, partly borrowed from his own mom. And he spotted a gap nobody owned. Apple and Samsung made expensive chargers and ignored the accessories, while everything cheap was garbage. So Anker went all in on Amazon itself, mastering the listings, the reviews, the logistics, and reached the whole Western world with no stores and no history to lean on. It beat established American and Japanese electronics giants on America's own digital shelf. By 2024, that was over $3 billion a year. First chargers, then speakers, robot vacuums, even home batteries. That's the new playbook. The old way was to buy a famous Western name. The new way? A Chinese company builds the trust directly, in your house, one 5-star review at a time, and you never once wondered where it came from. Morris Garages. The classic British sports car, founded in Oxford back in 1924, open-top roadsters, real racing heritage, a proper motoring icon. And then, it died. MG Rover collapsed in 2005, taking thousands of jobs with it. The brand was finished, so China bought the corpse. A state-owned giant called SAIC picked up the MG name through a takeover, for a tiny fraction of what it was once worth. And for a few years, nothing. MG just sat there. Then SAIC did the clever part. They realized the MG name still meant something to Western buyers. Familiar, trusted, a little nostalgic. The perfect disguise. So they used that old badge as the friendly face for a wave of modern, cheap electric Chinese cars. And it worked. MG is now one of the fastest-growing car brands in Europe. In 2023, it sold around 840,000 cars worldwide, the vast majority outside China. A British brand became the single biggest car export coming out of China. So when you see an MG on the road and think classic British car, you're really looking at a Chinese EV wearing a 90-year-old badge. The name survived, but everything behind it is Chinese. For decades, made in China just meant cheap. Not anymore. China stopped making the things you buy and started owning the names you trust to sell them. And the smartest part? They left the logos alone. Because that trust took the West decades to build, and it's worth far more left exactly where it is. That's what real influence looks like. Not loud. Just quietly sitting behind the brands you already let into your home. If you enjoyed this breakdown, like the video and subscribe to Barter Lab. Which brand surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments. Thanks for watching.